Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back today to RAM Assembles, which is a biennial architectural festival that the Rockbund Art Museum and Rockbund does every other year. And this is our second edition. And with my very great pleasure that I have Ozong Rashapong here with us today, who is the artistic director of this whole festival, who built these pavilions called Under the Common Sky for us to shelter under. And with Shanghai Picnic, we have open called many architects and also practitioners and researchers to join the architectural interventions that you can see in our plaza on the right. And on the left, there are 4 different interventions. And also, we had the very great pleasure to also invite curators and architects to join our program. And today, our program is curated by Bart-Jan Polman, who is sitting on my left. With this program, it's called the Assembled Nature's Planetary Potluck, which is a series of 6 conversations in which every single guests and speakers, they bring their own object and use the object as an ingredient for us to talk about all questions considering infrastructure. And then, so without further ado, I will introduce Bart-Jan Polman, who is a director of exhibitions and public programs, curator of the Arthur Ross Architectural Gallery at Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservations. And today is the 4th conversation of our Assembled Nature's Planetary Potluck, and we will be focusing on plural modernities and East Asian domesticities. With my very great pleasure, I also give some biographic parameters here to the speakers. So sitting next to Bart is Shirley Surya. Shirley is a curator of design and architecture at M+ in Hong Kong. She is a writer, historian, and since 2012, she has contributed to the M+ collections through researching design and architecture that engage the plural modernities and transnational knowledge networks, focusing on the Greater China and Southeast Asia. At M+, she co-curated exhibitions including I Am Pei, Life is Architecture in 2024, In Search of Southeast Asia through the M+ collections in 2018, and Building M+, the Museum and Architecture collection in 2014. Shirley is curator of the upcoming exhibition, How Modern Biographies of Architecture in China from 1949 to 1979, forthcoming in November 2025, organized by the Canadian Centre of Architecture in collaboration with M+. Shirley's writing have been featured in publications including Arc+, Harvard Design Magazine, Journal of the Society of Architectural Historians, and Efflux Architecture. And then on the far left, we have Nahyun Hwang. Nahyun Hwang is the founding principal of NHDM and an adjunct associate professor in architecture at Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. NHDM is a New York City and Seoul-based practice for design and research at the intersection of architecture, urbanism, and territory, operating across geographies and disciplinary borders in a wide range of scales and modes of output, often in direct dialogue with the cultural, political, ecological complexities of contemporary built environment. The work of the firm NHDM has been recognized through numerous supports and awards, including the 2023 Architectural Lead Emerging Voices Award, the 2023 and 2019 Graham Foundation grants, among many others. The firm's work has been presented at the 14th and the 17th Architectural Exhibition at the Venice Biennale and the 5th and the 6th International Architecture Biennial in Rotterdam, and Storefront for Art and Architecture, among others. The firm's most recent work includes Migrating Futures, commissioned by the 2023 Venice Biennale Korean Pavilion, and Now You Belong Here, Small Islands, Disappearing States, which is a forthcoming publication on the neo-colonial and other environmental injustice in the context of climate change. Before founding NHDM, Nahyun practiced as a senior associate at James Corner Field Operations and as the lead designers and lead project designers for the Highline Section 1 and 2, heading a multidisciplinary team of architects, landscape architect, and others. And over to you, Bart.
Thank you, Yoni. Thank you for these introductions, and good afternoon. And welcome to all of you here for what is now our fourth planetary potluck. My name is Bart-Jan Polman, and it's great to see so many of you here. And we're incredibly excited to have Nahyun and Shirley here today. So thank you for coming. So the concept of planetary potluck conversations has been developed in response to RAMa Assemblo's larger theme of Shanghai Picnic, as developed by Ratchaporn and Ozone, the artistic director. And I think today's session specifically also ties into a lot of the questions that are addressed with this installation. So a potluck, which often takes place as a picnic, and we have Shanghai Picnic, of course, here, traditionally means a communal dinner to which each guest brings their own food to share with everybody else. For these planetary potlucks, however, instead of food, we asked our guests to bring specific objects or multiple objects at a one-to-one scale. But not only that, not just the material objects, we also asked them to bring their very own specific and expert knowledge to share. So that is roughly the idea. That said, there is also food to share, and I was told today it's going to be mango, sticky rice, and dried squid. So that will arrive shortly. But so then the idea is to discuss the work and expert knowledge of each guest through the objects and the presentations in the form of sharing with a collective audience. This is all of you, and I will open it up very soon to questions as well, to hopefully have a conversation between, really a collective conversation between all of us with the collective audience. And as mentioned, we do this through 6 conversations that roughly sort of zoom out in scale. The first one focused on the site of Rockbund itself, the second on Shanghai, then China, Asia, and eventually the sort of planetary. But while each of these conversations have their own specific focus, there are some general themes that we do like to discuss and address in each session. And one of them, for example, is the notion of infrastructure, not understood simply as sort of technical, physical systems, but really as ecological and social constellations. So the question of the social that shape everyday life, mobility, and access. And particular emphasis is placed on how certain infrastructures might connect very grounded realities to planetary grounded localities, I should say, sorry, to planetary realities. And all of the objects that the guests brought, we can hopefully pass around as well through the audience. And in many ways, the ecologies that we want to talk about might affect very different scales, and these objects, in many ways, are part of the assemblies, the assembled natures that shape our everyday life. So the way this works is that we will hear two presentations, first from Shirley and then from Nahyun. They will discuss their expert knowledge and object, and we can discuss the sort of larger ecological and social constellations that these objects are part of. So and then after that we'll engage in a conversation and we'll open it up to the audience. And there's the food. Thank you. But you should take some. We'll put them here. Okay, so with that, I would like to invite Shirley to start.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I haven't met Ratchaporn for since COVID, so it's great to be here. Bart was, since Venice, and so thank you for inviting me, RAM team. It's wonderful to be actually using this space. Just kind of having researched this project and watched it grow, to say that it's so very, very communal, and your shelter made it even more so. So thank you for inviting me. So unfortunately, I don't have an object. So when Bart asked me can you please bring an object about plural modernities? And I'm like, I'm sorry, the object is all in the storage at M+. I collect some of these objects, whether it's a model or whether it's a photograph, or a poster. So yeah, so today what I'm sharing here is pretty much those objects. So you have to kind of like imagine its tactility, but let's try, yeah. So of course, when you brought up the topic plural modernities, and you can see in my bio, I always use that word to describe my interest, because I think when I started work in M+, I was like, I can't collect or build an architecture collection in Asia using the model that maybe what museums in Europe or America has done. I can't use the word modern in the same way. So I'm not saying I delete what modern is according to the perspectives that are in European American canon, but I think what we can do in a different geography is to expand that meaning. And the word plural is, again, it's an inclusive one. And I think this is very important because up till today, people think that, oh, don't be so picky on the term, But actually, no, the term is quite loaded. And we still have many very loaded assumptions about the term. So some of these examples here are like really just snippets. People can go deeper into it, but I just use them as a curator. I'm not an expert, like a scholar looking at something very closely, but I use it as a conversation starter. And as a questioner, a probe. So that's kind of my own, and over here, the probe is very particular. I'm just looking at the idea of the big roof, 大屋顶, right? 那个大屋顶 is not just a China thing, right? But across the board. And the ornate. Ornate 就是装饰, like very rich, very decorative, because these two are, people think, are antithetical to perhaps what is modern in a very architectural design sort of way, or maybe the idea of geometric abstraction in visual art, right? Modern means a particular aesthetic. I think, yes, I agree with that. Some things are really very immediate. Yes, that's modern, that's so modernist, whatever that is. I can't deny that, but let's open it up. Let's see it beyond just how it looks, right? So that's kind of my own little lesson for myself, but also the lesson that I wanted to share with others, to see things in other ways that are beyond beyond the form, beyond the style. Right, so okay, let's see, how do I do this? Oops, it's up and down, so I should be pressing it. What should I do, yeah? Oh, it's a PDF, so what do I do? Okay, how should I do this? Can I ask Tintin for help? Should be like a play mode, right? Yeah. Yes, thank you. Okay. So yeah, so I think, again, forget it, this is too boring, it's all right. But I'm just saying the word modern has many meanings. I'm sure all of you here who have studied what that meant, it's a much bigger condition. In fact, modernity, we are still facing this. We are still going through it. And so I think the idea of a condition of living for all of us here, and modernization being a very broad sense of process, social, economic, but then also it can come out in the idea of it being modern, right? Whether it's in the form of artistic, intellectual ideas, or even in a form. But all of this has to do with questioning a certain tradition, a certain past, and moving forward to represent a zeitgeist, a spirit of the now. So in general, it's that sort of like, kind of a kind of progress, but also at the same time, reactionary one based on what you're facing in the past. You can't really get rid of the past. So it's always part of it. And so this is just my own little kind of, not my own, but the framework that I have borrowed from one of the many scholars, I'm sure. And this is just what I wrote, again, too boring for you to figure it out. But basically, when I talk about the modern, you must, I think not you must, but we must consider it from these three dimensions, not just on a stylistic dimension, but political here just meant that what are we doing with power? Is state a bad thing? If there is no government, how about private enterprises? Isn't that power too? How do you exercise power for social betterment? So that's the political dimension. So it's not about state or no state. It's actually about what kind of power is being wielded by whom, for what purpose, right? For whom? Who is who is the body here? Who's the collective? And the other one is the cultural. And cultural here, of course, there will always be something that is inventiveness. There's a new thing. It's about going not following or copying the past, but a degree of reinterpreting. But the social here is really about the zeitgeist, about what is today. What are we going through today? What are we reflecting of our aspiration today? So that's kind of like the social aspect. Again, I just showed these two books, right? One book is like super like influential, even though it's so long ago. everything modern means flat roof, white walls, glass, transparency. It's a very kind of immediate kind of click. But for us, I think it's much more than that style, but it sets a lot of our understanding. Until today, we are still adoring the glass box. You know, we can't get rid of the glass box. But of course, the other one what Silkfried Gideon did was a much more broader idea of the modern. It involves infrastructure, you know, all of the notion of speed, economy, and all of that, right? So that's kind of just wanted to bring that up. So that's just my own underpinnings as my research. Whenever I look at something in Asia, I can't just look from one kind of point of view, but all of these in mind. So again, I start with this image. So those who are in architecture history or architects, do you know, anyone can guess what? I don't think anyone can guess. Can you guess where it is? Unfair, you know. Can you guess which period it's built? Period. Oh, you guys are good, because I'm expecting people to think that this is older. But this is actually 59, yeah? I think it's about 59 to 61. So yeah, it's Geoffrey Bawa's design, his very first domestic kind of like building for Ina da Silva, a textile artist, right? So what I'm saying here is that he himself went through a kind of shift. He came back from AA, you know, and then built these things that we see even in West Africa, right? Very grid-like, you know, what you can call it flat roof and all of that. But then he moved on to what this is, which doesn't look like what it is. Because at this time, and then I was asking like, why? So I think it's easy to attribute Geoffrey Bawa's shift in from this to this, which is like a very kind of like a traditional kind of like a courtyard home, you know, like a very Sinhalese, I guess, in that sense, and the kind of like the tiled roof. So all of these are basically very vernacular in that sense, but what made this shift? And it's easy to say, oh, is the artist's ability to enlightenment or whatever, but no. Actually, interestingly, he was part of a group of actually textile artists, but also historians who were actually very aware, or even architects who were aware, like, you know what, let's try to start researching what's our indigenous architecture. And there was a lot of research going on in that circle. And he was influenced by that, but together with what's happening in politics. Right? Of course, there was a fight, there was a growing of independence in Sri Lanka. And of course, with that, politically, you also want to say, how do I express this culturally, right? So then there was a shift. And this is almost like a very definite shift for him. Later on, you'll show another building that is not like this, but it just shows that we can all intermingle. I don't think there's just one kind of like solid way in which you have to be very consistent. Just do this, and you can't do anything else. So I think that's why I learned from Geoffrey's Pactor. So this is, again, the very first hotel that really sets the standard for the tropical resort, at least in Sri Lanka. But of course, in Bali, this is even earlier than Bali. So it's built, again, on a kind of like mimicking the fort that used to be here, like raised up. But again, the same thing. It's really about the big roof here, the hipped vernacular roof. You don't need to do this, but he was very particular in choosing this as a form. Right? And of course, the materiality and all of that. So again, I won't go into detail about the building, but I just wanted to say this is an image of Kandy. So Kandy, of course, is also the home of Manette da Silva, another female Sri Lankan architect. And you can see all the vernacular buildings are also of the same hipped roof. Yeah? So that's kind of the language that he's coming from, but at the same time, he used it for very different purposes. This is the one that I say was an anomaly. While he was designing all of these in '68, this is the first tropical high-rise. So you know about the window that is, there's a name for it, monsoon window, yeah. So meaning there's an opening that actually blocks the rain, but still allows the air to come out. So this is actually for an office, right? Of course, it's a bank. Right? So this thing could be happening at the same time as he's building all of that. So I think there's no need to be a kind of like fixation. It's really about kind of a porousness to what is, again, the need of a building type. And again, this is, of course, a later project, 77, 1980. Again, a major hip roof. But over here, if you would, it is a whole new island built for the parliament. And if you look at the site plan, it's also borrowing from the asymmetry, but also symmetry of the monastery. So if you look at the palatial kind of like plan of the old ancient sites in Sri Lanka, it's also of these, like many mini and like larger pavilions. And so at the same time, still some sort of axial sort of approach. So I just wanted to go into the interior. So that's the model that, of course, we acquired. So again, objects, here's the model that is in storage right now at RAMa, and it's on display as well. It's very ornate. This is actually a very tin, very solid tin roof. This is, but then it's very intricate at the same time. And so for me, even this aesthetic, right? It's at first I'm like, I couldn't understand what is this. Is it trying to mimic like antique or what? You know, like, but it's actually really deriving from a traditional flag design of the Kandi kingdom, and then from there making it, and they're all very floral, very floral. It's really a kind of an homage to the natural environment without shame. It's okay to be figurative, you know, like this is how we express our care for what is the richness of flora and fauna in Sri Lanka. And so it comes out in the chandelier, you know, in all these other, the bronze casts as well. So yeah, so then this is where, I'm sure you all know, right? Very near you guys. Yes, correct. Shanghai Exhibition Center, right? But this is actually the Sino-Soviet Friendship Hall, 1955. I have to say, I only been to this building and have a close look last year, 2 years ago, sorry, and I was amazed. I was amazed at my amazement. I was like, why am I feeling moved? You know, why? Because I love, you know, I love our modernist kind of aesthetic, but this one, why am I feeling like lifted up? I was asking myself and another friend who's also like never been inside. You know, we only judge it from the outside. But we never really seen the inside. And then when we talk about, and then if you want to be unbiased and don't just kind of push it aside and say, this is utterly ornamental, you know, like out of my way, you just look at the kind of like, okay, this is not different from what's happening in Russia. This is, of course, built by Russian architects. And so the motif of the maybe it's a grain wreath, the floral, the fruits, right? These are, I think for me, I almost felt the way we read buildings or signs, we need to understand who made it, why were they made, and not just a very plain judgment on our side. And this means something to the people who made it at that time. It means something to the people who saw it at that time. And so I think these things are something that I felt like we really need to, plurality is really got to do with not just seeing it from your lens, but seeing it from what was happening, who made it, and who consumed it. Why was it made? So yeah, so of course, at the moment, socialist realism has never been part of the modern canon. People have denied that. Why? Is it because it's non-capitalist? Is socialist realist out because it's decorative? Is it why? So I think this is the question now, because a lot of historians still doesn't really want to put it as part of that canon. But for me, I think it is. This is a reaction. It's a modern reaction to the times. No longer what is built for the banks at that point by the 50s. It was a very bank architecture. Whatever there was in the 20s of modern architecture is already co-opted by big business. So therefore, I want to react against that, and that's why they actually built this on, right? Of course, nobody likes Stalin, and that's fine. I mean, he's not a good guy, sure, but there's a reason why the Stalinist style, you know, was about revival of the classics, right? Like many other parts of history. So again, these are all photos, by the way. These are we collected magazines from the 50s as well that only lasted for 10 years, manhua. And then, so all of these are really, this is all, just have to say, these are all photos taken by Hwang Tuo's, stills from Hwang Tuo's film. We are very grateful that Hwang Tuo is commissioned to do 10 sites. 10 sites built between 49 to 79 and just capturing it from today. Because they all still exist. They're all still part of our fabric. But what do we do with the history? Amnesiac, completely. We don't really think about it. It's traumatic. So let's not think about it. Just use it for exhibition hall. That's it. So I think that's kind of why we wanted to revisit these spaces again. Same thing. So this is very rare because an exhibition happens to be changing. If not, if you go in, it's all just like booths. Yeah. So again, of course, the Soviet Hall very much aesthetically influenced what was in the Great Hall of the People. But by that time, by the 59, it was no longer about the same kind of like ornateness. There's a use of the flat roof, sure, but the colonnade, of course, still borrows the same language in terms of like this classicism, neoclassicism. So again, all of these, I feel like all of these is a very familiar image, but I think what in the exhibition that we're trying to do now is that this is modern in terms of like there's a reason why something so figurative needs to be symbolized or communicated as part of a new socialist identity at that time. So there's still validity to understand what was the phenomenon at that point, instead of just making a very big judgment on power, or this is state, the people are small, this is the state, that's it. But there are many artistic decisions made by architects to design it in this particular way. And so of course, even the big roof, right? A lot of judgment about the big roof, national style. So for us also, this is also part of that, you know, and this is not just us. In Korea, same thing. or even in Cambodia, right? Or even in Thailand, Indonesia. Everybody has big roof, or Sri Lanka, right? But there's reason for using it. And so this is a very key one for me until today. There's a reason for a complete contextual response, Tiananmen in Beijing, right? This is, the dormitory on the green roof is really in relation to what's happening in Jingshan. So again, I'm going to Taiwan now. And just wanted to say the big roof, the politics of the big roof continues. And I think this is part of the story. I think plurality also meant understanding the different motivation and reaction against it. So Wang Dahong, again, one of the very key, also Harvard trained, went to Taiwan, but born actually in Beijing. He refused to follow the big roof, like a traditional palace big roof, and so he wanted a big roof that is almost like an officer's hat. The Chinese officer's hat that's a little bit more kind of linear, yeah, a little not curved, not upturned. But then the government pushed it away and forced him to do something upturned. So if you go to Taipei today, the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall is exactly like this, right? So at the moment it's like that. And that's just a photo that we have in our archive. So it's that sort of being forced. But then I'm just saying, like, the politicization of style, actually, it's part of the story. It's not just like a non-entity just because it's of a non-modernist aesthetic sort of thing. But again, I'm moving now to Cambodia. We also acquired Van Mollevans. So again, when I first saw this, I was a bit shocked. Like, this is literally like, in Malaysia, and Thailand, and Cambodia, in Indonesia, the stilt house, general form. But of course, it's built in concrete. But then the idea of the roof is the same. The strategy of the air coming out at the top is the same. So this is actually for workers, office workers housing for the bank, National Bank of Cambodia. So I'm just saying that again. But then of course Van Mollevan is capable of this, right? It's really like a spectrum of things that he's really. But he has to explore that language. He wants to, right? And so this is of course again a bit more kind of geometric. Kind of abstraction of the traditional roof as well for National Theatre. But the pattern are all based on this textile pattern that he also sees in the traditional textile. And then, of course, now I'm moving, this is my last project, which we just acquired thanks to the Charles Correa Foundation, is really projects by Charles Correa in the 80s. And all of this, if you know about the ancient architecture of a Buddhist or Hindu, the mandala, right, the very sacred 9 sets of squares, but it happens to be used for the design of a cultural center called Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur. But at the same time, this thing happens to be, but you see the playfulness of the square being kind of cut out. At first, I thought the model was spoiled. I was like, is the model like not working? Something broke? And then I saw the building. Oh, the building is actually designed like this. And the reason for that is because he's also trying to respond to the city of Jaipur. You see the missing East Jaipur map is on the top. And you see at the corner, it also has a piece that comes out. So he's just kind of responding. It's a very playful double coding of a design. You're referring to designing something that is based on a kind of ancient kind of a type, a cosmology, but at the same time also still referring to the city. So the reason why he does this is because it's a cultural center. It's really meant to also exhibit. It's a gallery, but it's a gathering point. So like what we are right now, this court, you could see so many courts in which people are able to gather at different steps. Like almost like a step well, but it's on the ground. And then different kind of pockets and nooks and crannies, right? Very intimate, but then also very release of a space over different squares of the grid. So yeah, so I'll just end with this very kind of quickly. I guess to me, his desire for using this language is not just something on nostalgia. It's a very different strategy from POMO of the American or the Europe, which is about a kind of like borrowing of a language. It's like a rhetoric. It's like to me, it's like a play of signs. But for them, it's more than, it is a bit of that, but also it's a very pragmatic use of the space. It's a spatial urban design strategy that could still be very relevant to how we use space, how we gather, but at the same time still reminding us that this continuity continues. So yeah, that's sort of, and to actually not, I guess the idea is people forget that during the colonial era, there was a sense of abandonment or looking down on the vernacular type. So a lot of post-colonial kind of like exploration by architects is actually a redeeming. It's a redeeming of a past that people think is like primitive, right? But this is now an activation for contemporary buildings. So I think that itself is part of the understanding of plurality because of the different methods and motivation. So yeah, so I'll just end with that. Hopefully, this is helpful, but something lighthearted from.
Thank you, Shirley. That's amazing. It makes me wonder let's clap. Thank you, Shirley. This is amazing. It makes me wonder, which is maybe something we can go back to during the conversation as well. If instead of there's plural modernities, and I also wonder if we can speak about plural modernisms, which I'm sure we can. But if there's a distinction between the plural modernisms and plural modernities, especially in the case of socialist realism. Anyways, that's for later. Now we move to Nahyun, and I think it's amazing that this conversation deals with big roofs under a big roof, let's say, and now moves to our sort of seating arrangements here. So, please.
Yeah, we are bound.
Yes, yeah, maybe
I'm correct. Yeah, let's just be open. Okay, this is.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks so much for the invitation to this fantastic event. I think we didn't talk about what we were going to talk about at all, but it's amazing. I think it's amazing how Shirley talked about actually big roof, and I will be talking about small floors. So, small and very, very, I don't know, itinerant floors. So I was kind of struck by Bart's provocation about infrastructure as something that is beyond technocratic. Maybe we can think about modernity in terms of, I know that Bart wanted me to be the expert, but in terms of the epistemologies that are not maybe something that architects would claim as expert knowledge, I thought that would be interesting. And I thought it would be interesting to look at something that is rather ephemeral, however very concrete in our kind of domesticity, etc. But the domesticity, of course, expands beyond the domicile. And that is, I think, one of the maybe powerful things that these floating floors in Asia, I would say, do. So I titled this casual talk, it will be just kind of looping slides, but I titled this 돗자리 assemblage. So 돗자리 is kind of a rather very generic now term that means the mat on the floor, or on the ground rather. It has been used traditionally indoor and outdoor in Korea, and we all know that across kind of Asian countries and many countries that would be actually more towards a sitting lifestyle has similar instruments. And oh, see this thing again. No, no. Second slide. Okay. Yes. So I titled it 자리 assemblage because 자리 means this mat, but at the same time in Korean it also means place or space, and it also means plant. So this kind of triple etymology is extremely interesting. And here you're seeing how children in 70s in the alleyway, they're collecting different ground material that basically as an extension of their home into the street, and then they're kind of forming new communities. So that's kind of a general idea of the talk. So I wanted to talk about not only the assemblage as a collectivity, but also material kind of ecologies behind different types of mat and historically. No? Tintin. Yeah, the first section. No. Yeah, so, yeah, first. Yeah, so now I stand up and then talk about different mats. So here, I'm trying to kind of map different mat materials. So 돗자리, which is the traditionally plant-based mat, it is really interesting because 돗 also means plant, 자리 also means plant. So these kind of culture of making mat in traditional sense and forming a kind of collectivity around it is heavily related to the kind of ecology and environment and more than human lives. And that has been a tradition, as you can see here. It not only becomes the mat, it becomes the roof. It is with the environment where we're inhabiting and etc. So you're here seeing kind of some of the instruments where your hands movement actually begins to generate this floor. And it is always kind of collective activity rather than, you know, solitary activity. And the materials that makes that mat themselves are actually also natural. So there's this kind of tangible relationship between people and the mat. And it really becomes a kind of sometimes the kind of setup for the collective activity, but sometimes it's not necessarily synced. Sometimes it is actually rather something for the ritual. A lot of times it's trying to expand the home outward. And here you're seeing some of the contemporary conditions that it is being made. So what is happening with a lot of this kind of plant-based material and how these things have changed throughout the era is that due to the climate change and industrialization and big ag culture and etc., rather than growing them in the natural setting, they begin actually growing in vinyl greenhouses. And then you can see even in this kind of rather artificial setting than before, they are very intimately engaging the plant material. There is always a kind of tactility with the material. There's the, however, mediated the relationship with the environment and etc. These are, yeah. So here you're kind of seeing how in the contemporary contemporary context, they're being hung and dried and mass-produced in a little bit twisted sense, I would say, because it used coal and other kind of petrochemical material to dry them. But however, it is kind of continuing tradition. Yeah. So it is interesting to think about how then this kind of traditional idea of mat as something that expands out of the home, maybe just closer to your home, actually becomes in the in later era something that is much more communal. We can go to the second hint. Yeah, so now as you kind of moving into the quote-unquote modern era, you begin seeing the 돗자리s in the much more urban setting. So these are basically the expansion of the home into the space that's outside of your home and way away from your home. And it is sometimes a challenging, a challenge or the resistance to the concretization of the ground. So you can kind of see, I think the slide already passed, but Korea, well, Seoul has this very, very sandy beach all along Han River that became concretized around 60s and 70s. And people are insisting that they need a beach. And in order to have beach, they are bringing versions of 돗자리s onto the kind of concrete bank and then claiming those spaces as they used to be, and then you're kind of seeing similar scenes here. But what's interesting in that material is this. What's interesting with these rather kind of contemporary mat is that they're not produced by plants, through plants, or they're not produced by hands. They're all machine-made. And then it is essentially petrochemical product from oil. So it's polypropylene straws, basically, that is highly industrialized. But what is still interesting is attempt to kind of harken back to some notion of idea or plant lives, which is extremely, extremely interesting. And it is rather also interesting phenomenon. I don't know if these kind of mats used a lot in China, but in Korea, we can see that the flow of these materials are rather transnational. So the patterns of the flowers or ornament, going back to Shirley's points, kind of somehow the notion of nature, these patterns are intentionally designed to kind of appeal to multiple cultures. So you will see that, okay, that is maybe similar to some aspects of the Korean pattern before, but it is, I don't know if some Pakistani person come, they can say it's their carpet. You know, there are this kind of multinational fluidity in a way in that materiality. And it is quite interesting, they also call this good old days mat, because in their mind, this, even though the materials are quite artificial, it still kind of speaks of the good old days, the act of weaving, however mechanic it is. Okay, so third mat is the aluminum foil mat, which is the most commonly used mat in Korea, I would say right now. And it is so commonly used that you can actually see it in the convenience stores everywhere, or there are rental spaces for this. So this kind of speaks to in the highly densified city like Seoul, people have desire to have their home outside. And what is maybe a little bit different from kind of Western picnic is their kind of Koreans' sitting culture, because it's so naturally flowing onto the outside. The relationship is a little bit more continuous rather than a contrast to the kind of everyday life. So if you look at the photos of what they're doing, they're pretty much just kind of, I don't know, whatever you're doing in your bedroom or whatever you're doing in your living room, just lounging, talking, eating. But this kind of mat actually marks the drastic change in the kind of material economy and ecology, and how that actually affects the culture in general, because the imperviousness and the waterproofing aspects of it is very, very emphasized. So when you try to buy these things, it's always impervious, silver-coated mat. That is a good thing. I guess it's impervious and waterproofed, but because it needs to be coated with aluminum foil, it actually needs to come from aluminum. So the production process is entirely different from the plant-based situation, and it actually has a large impact due to its extraction. So you can see kind of various, let's say, raw material of this mat. The other thing I want to mention is that it is also used a lot of times to sit in the street for various demonstrations or sit-ins or resistance. So it is a way to occupy the street without getting wet. Okay, so this is this guy over here. Oh, by the way, the shapes of each one's slightly trying to refer to where they came from. So the first is referring to the kind of seed pod of the plant that the most common traditional 돗자리s are made. This actually was referring to the polypropylene granules. So that's entirely synthetic material that's usually dyed in bright colors. Here we're talking about this specific flooring material called monoleum, which is like a variant of linoleum. So this is what's called pyeongsangs, which is very, very similar to what we have here. That a lot of cultures have the raised floor where you can actually take off your shoes and then sit down, not standing up like this, usually sitting down. In Korea, it a lot of times occupies alleyway in a really informal way. And then this is where people just take a nap, prepare food together, be with the nature, however kind of modest it is. This guy checking something on the phone, etc. What is interesting for this situation is that it is usually covered with this wood-grained PVC flooring. Talking about the plural modernity, it is the continuation of the linoleum in the West, and then domestication of the linoleum that happened post-World War II in the US, and how the linoleum actually represented kind of perfect domesticity with cleanliness, cushiness, etc. So when I was growing up, a lot of Korean households actually had linoleum floor. They got rid of wooden floor and they all covered their floor with this vinyl material. Now they are all going back to wood. However, outdoor, they insist that they bring their indoor, which used to be this fake wood that is very cushy and convenient outside. So it works as a waterproofing, but it's a kind of almost like a reminder for them to kind of continue the life of the floor outside. And I thought that was very interesting. And this shape is the flower petal of a flax seed, a flax flower, which was the original ingredients of the linoleum. So we know linoleum as a very chemicalized product, but original linoleum is actually entirely almost natural. So it's flax and sawdust and a lot of other natural material that formed linoleum. So there's an interesting kind of continuity between the kind of flower origin of linoleum and then all the domestic patterns that happened on it as the flower patterns and all these things. And then later is permutation into entirely synthetic and artificial kind of patterning of it. Yeah, and then this one is this one. And I wanted to talk about the kind of quote-unquote Western picnic culture or Western picnic pattern that is overpowering Korean mat landscape. So then now it is very popular to have checker-shaped or checker motive mat. And checker-shaped mat, I should have had the kind of commercials of those things, but it is a lot of its advertisement shows baguette and fresh milk in a jug and whatnot, little flowers that don't grow in Korea. So there's this kind of almost like a mimicry of Western mat, or we would say Western 돗자리s. And then there's also kind of individuation of this material. So in traditional Korean, one is usually collective. And then now they are becoming smaller and smaller. So there's a one-person 돗자리 or couples 돗자리, which basically trying to mark their own personal territory but doesn't allow kind of collective coalescing around it. Yes, and then finally, finally is the tarp. So the tarp is, I would say, is the chari of multiple charis. It's sometimes used to make charis. I don't know if you guys saw in the previous videos, people are sitting on tarp to make other charis. But it is the ultimate kind of global trade material that's co-opted and kind of permutated in Korea as a material for sitting on, or material to sell their things, or material to, what is the next, lie in the nature. And the effect that it has, or the kind of pervasiveness that it has, are enormous. I don't know what the next slide is. That's it.
Thank you, Nahyun. I think we'll move back to our cushions. Sit here. Thank you so much. I think let's say, I think in both cases, what I find fascinating is how sort of one element of architecture, let's say, whether it's the roof or the sort of seating element of seating, really reveal a sort of plurality of networks, and I think those are both material and symbolic. And I think the material is maybe more material in the case of Nahyun, and maybe more symbolic in the case of the roof. But of course, the material and the symbolic are overlapping here. My first question, maybe to open it up to both of you, is if we think about sort of networks that these things are part of, and how sort of the imaginaries around the roofs or the sort of seating arrangements get constructed socially, I'm curious about the role of different media in that. And I think you both hinted somewhat on that already. You showed Shirley Manhwa magazine, so there are certain images circulating through magazines, but also, you know, I think contemporary forms of media circulation, let's say. Or in the case of Nahyun, you mentioned the advertisement with the baguette, let's say. So there's a sort of contemporary idea of these images circulating on, I don't know, Instagram or wherever. So I was wondering if each of you could speak a little bit more how media functions in the way that these sort of, let's say, symbolisms are constructed. Does that make sense? Maybe Shirley.
I can only say that it's both like it's a reflection of an existing state, but it proliferates also, right? So media is always that sort of like. So I think, you know, when you, if to see a cover of the Soviet palace in Beijing, it's only because it was such a big deal at that point, and therefore you cover it. But then by having it published and disseminated, you reify like the importance of what that means to a kind of like new socialist Chinese identity or association with the Soviet. So I think you can't deny that it's always both a reflection, but also,
But does that change? Because I think, especially in this sort of context, the idea of plural modernities, if you look at sort of contemporary media ecologies, maybe an image can go viral because it's not important yet, but it becomes important because of...
no, definitely. It has the same function, but perhaps not in the same kind of like mass, like across nations sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, whatever that gets printed at that time really spoke a lot. People will be using it as an instrument. It was much more instrumental, I guess, because there were only one political cartoon magazine. That's why it has to shut down in 1960, because it was giving very many mixed messages. So I think it's powerful in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's some media, contemporary media aspects of it in terms of the advertisement, as I talked about it, as Bart also pointed out. But I think how the 돗자리 works is a little bit different. I think 돗자리 is the media.
That's okay. That's great.
돗자리 is the media because I think it is. Yeah, it basically generates a ground for sharing beyond your own home. So I can imagine in the olden days, where you have 돗자리, that's where the news propagates, that's where gossips flourish, that's where you share food, so that is the media. You can also see from some of the references that sometimes it's used politically. You would have oversized mat arrangement that's very different from what commoners would have, and that becomes kind of focal point of political or other types of rituals and events. So I think there's that. In the contemporary sense, there's a lot of 돗자리 film festival.
The films, I was thinking specifically.
Yeah, or 돗자리 concert, that you bring your own 돗자리, and then you will be kind of making a ginormous formation out of it, and that is your Instagram moment. So I think in a kind of twisted, inverse manner, 돗자리 becomes the media. Yeah.
I mean, same goes for any subject of media.
Yeah.
The subject itself is a medium, right? So architecture itself, it's a medium already in itself. So I think you're talking about mass media, printed media,
yes, in this
versus a medium that actually activates something. Many things could be medium.
Yeah.
Like, they have an agency such as that, right?
Even I'm thinking of your Charles Correa example as well, where it moves beyond the sort of postmodern idea of referencing different things. I mean, maybe to continue that question a little bit, because you mentioned something at one point that I found interesting, which is the notion, the impact of colonialism, let's say, and the sort of, you mentioned the redeeming of a past, which of course is closely tied to sort of colonial notions, I'm thinking, and this is the creation of otherness, let's say, so the redeeming of a past is part of sort of the creation of an otherness that is inherent to a sort of colonial projects. And I think in the case of Nahyun, I'm wondering in the Korean context, if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, and maybe Shirley as well, but maybe Nahyun to start.
First of all, I don't want to make a sweeping statement about this same phenomenon everywhere, because I think there are some, like in India, interestingly, I think, how do you say this? Okay, I'm just saying that there'll be examples where it's not completely obliterated, right? But of course, in Sri Lanka, there was a sense as though like colonialism is a sort of like a modern progress, and therefore you don't turn back. So you borrow either the complete European kind of like language of buildings and not really return to the hut. So that's I'm not saying that every system is like that, but at least, because I'm just trying to think right now, like there must be examples where the colonial masters, like it depends whether you're Dutch, whether you're German, or whether you're, Americans, that actually does consider the vernacular. So I think the British, to me, actually does perhaps are more sensitive in bringing out what could be from the vernacular. I'm just looking at like the bungalows. Yep, the bungalows could be like a form of like a vernacular, but then they make it into their own sort of like larger scale. Of course, they only house the officials, but I'm just saying like, yeah, but the natural tendency is to offer a sort of a different mode of progress by not looking at existing types. But there are also architects, there are also colonial masters who actually could be sensitive to those things too. But yeah, I guess within Sri Lanka, that was a different mode. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the case of Korea is a little bit different, maybe because it's less redemption or going back to the kind of engaging the vernacular in a new way, but rather the destruction of the colonial structure as a spectacular celebrated moment. And then that becomes actually a lot of impetus and kind of political justification for newer projects. So that has been happening everywhere a lot. The Cheonggyecheon, I don't know if you guys know this long stream that's in the middle of the city. That used to be a stream that was covered up by Japanese government. And later the Korean military government made a highway over it. And then it was occupied by a bunch of merchants that was very hard to control by the government. So then the way the government justified the eviction of those merchants was that because originally the highway was built by military government, so we should demolish it. Because there was a Japanese who covered the stream, so we must rebuild the stream. So we made this very, very long, nice stream that is water pumped. It's entirely pumped by electricity, yeah. And then we put a lot of goldfish in there. So it is very nice to walk and eat lunch, but colonial structures, a lot of times the demolition of it becomes kind of a symbol of modernism. And in Korea's case, it's also interesting because it was Japan who colonized us. And the architectural style of Japanese colonization was not Japanese architecture, rather it was Western other imperial architecture. So there's this kind of twisted condition, so that when when, let's say, British-looking Japanese building was demolished, then, okay, we can build our own modern structure that's different from these things. So then there's this kind of quite interesting twist in there. Yeah.
Plural Modernities, I would say. I wanted to see if there are already any questions from the audience. Oh, Ratchaporn. Yeah.
We're talking a lot about colonization and the kind of link to modernity. And I just want to share that even though Thailand was not colonized formally, we are kind of colonized culturally. And what was interesting for us for me, let's say, listening to what you say is that we don't have this kind of movement using modern architecture to kind of liberate anything. And, but it was more like using modern architecture as a way to show the Westerner that we are as cultural as they are. We are as civilized as they are. Like we built a lot of all this neoclassical building. First of all, like we call it modern because it was non-local, and to show that it was really, we were as advanced as the European or the American. But when we built that neoclassical building was already early 20th century. It should have been like really like Le Corbusier kind of modern building, but we chose to equalize our architecture with Western neoclassical model. So that was also interesting that it kind of even went back further to how we appropriate the architectural language to show or to equalize. We think that we equalize ourselves to the Western architecture or civilizations. And interestingly, those architects who worked in Thailand by then are European, and they had to find a way to build in tropical climates, but with Western form that didn't make any sense. Like neoclassical building that didn't make any sense climate-wise in Bangkok. They had to invent a lot of kind of technique or strategy for people to be able to live inside that building. So that is a kind of the reverse process, as you just mentioned.
I really think that, you know, with all these big ideas that we have in like labeling or like explaining a particular phenomenon across the board, there will always be these wonderful exceptions when in the end, the human is the agency.
Exactly.
You know, like, so whether you're a colonial master or not, whether you're forced to build something that is completely alien or not, I'm sure if you're a good architect and if you want to live properly in a house or a building,
you'll find a way.
You will come up with a solution that actually addresses common sense or common way of living. You know, like, so in some ways I feel like, you know, we often like kind of like, you know, this is what's really happening, but no, there's always something that's against that, resisting this bigger force. Yeah. So yeah.
So that's why I like the way you address as kind of plural modernity. It's like really it's a kind of idea of progress, but we probably have different idea of what progress is. So that's just not any question, just kind of comment or adding.
Yes, any reflection is good. It's like,
can I add something too?
Yes.
I think it's also interesting how you talked about before modernism versus modernity, maybe, or you wanted to talk about it. I think somehow, at least in Korean context, and I think in many other non-Western contexts, sometimes modernism is redeemed, I think. Redeemed. A lot of the modern ideas or ideas of the modernism that were only on the paper or only as a kind of imaginary or kind of a quote-unquote utopian ideas, sometimes that gets realized a lot of times actually in non-Western, like basically the non-originating locations. Korea had, for whatever reason, a lot of Korean older master architects, men. They all studied under, many of them studied under Le Corbusier. Yeah, and then as a result, a lot of projects that they proposed were these megastructures. There was one of the famous megastructure is 1 kilometer long, and it's called World Lock Complex or something like that. That would never be kind of realized in actual Western context, or never was. But it was able to be realized in Korea because of the specific conditions of modernity or specific context of developmentalism, which I think then begins to actually show what those structures might have been, but then in a very much transformative way. Because yes, it's a megastructure, but what is happening inside is entirely different from what Le Corbusier imagined, right? So there are a couple of those things, and talking about the roof, that reminds me of French embassy in Seoul. Have you been there? Yeah, the roof. So Jung-up Kim, who's the architect of that building, he also studied under Le Corbusier. Then Le Corbusier's Longchamp roof now becomes the French embassy roof in Seoul, but also harkening back to the Korean traditional roof lines. So there's that kind of almost like a very, very interesting conflation. And that, again, kind of goes back to the post-colonial challenge or post-colonial attitude. If you guys use the classicism, then we will be using quote-unquote modernism. So I think there's a very interesting, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but very interesting expression of modernism. Yeah.
X, please.
No, I mean, I went to architecture school, but I studied art. So I feel like I was always trying to find connections between what art thinking and architectural thinking have the connection. So one thing that Rashapam mentioned and it was you guys all shared made me think about Soviet Winter's idea of this transparent eye, this kind of a Western white male as this transparent eye, how we design everything. So modern architecture, who is the habitant of that space? It's that transparent eye. And I think it's interesting when thinking about this vernacular architecture, I think that habitant is different. It's like what this structure has changed how we behavior in this very colonial kind of a neighborhood. You know, it's like it just have a completely different set of people and relation of people in mind of architecture. I don't know if that's something related to the mat and also related to the roof, because I think they just, in architect's mind, who they're designing for, that is not that transparent eye. Did that make sense?
I think the way we behave in the space is totally different, and the people, like, I think the most interesting thing here when we start to build is like people just get very casual with all this element easily. And I'm not sure if this would be, it would be like this in south of France, let's say. No, for real, it's different. It's different. I'm sure that, I'm not sure if they would just go to sit on the platform like you are doing. It's just totally different. And I'm glad you brought this kind of mat jade thing. It's I don't know if this is really Asian thing, or I'm just, when you bring up this idea of like different people, I think I thought right away of this mat, that how people would react if we do this in, like, let's say, South France. I think it's different. And also the picnic mat is different.
I just wanted to kind of see about this whole Asian versus not sort of thing. I agree. I think within this period of the last, let's say, you can say maybe 100 years, whether it's Indonesia, there's a name for this. In Indonesia, it's the lembang. You know, like we also just hang out. If you go to Documenta, he used that word, it's that kind of chill space.
The rice barn.
Yeah, kind of like that. And it's similar in that sense, right? There's a continuity from the yesteryears to now. People are still using the same way. But whether it's Asian or not, yeah, correct. No, it's okay to, because for me, I always like realize that there's a historian about studying how the chair developed, even in the European context. Actually, in the Roman period, it was like this. Let me drink my wine on the ground, right? So I think this idea of like the body, you know, it could be a technological thing. It could be many reasons why we are sitting up on chairs. But you're right. I think there's a reason to say that culturally, in contemporary culture, yeah, we do behave differently still, yeah, within certain cultural context, yeah.
But the environment also shape how people behave, and after a while, you might be formed by the context too. So it's like there's so many different slipperage that happens, and I think that kind of friction or the conflict maybe is more interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's what we should be looking out for, being open to that, right? Not to fix it. Right? So I think plurality is really an attitude of looking, of not just saying this is this, right? But knowing that, yeah, it slips in and out. So I think, yeah. So I think it's actually more important to look at the changes and the shifts than actually fixating on certain notions and then saying this is what it is. I feel like I think acknowledging it is good, but seeing how it moves is good. Yeah.
I'm with you on this, like changing, conflict, slippery, and all that. But how do we name it? Like it is very difficult for me as well. Like I don't want to label this as like super Asian space or anything. But how do we kind of describe it? But maybe you.
I don't think as the Western white man, I should be the one to answer that. So please, but I do think there is one sort of very important thing I want to stress here is the question of agency. I think the agency of, you know, the designer of the chair through the chair, and then the chair itself makes you sit in it in a particular way, you know, like so. But please, Nahyun, yes.
I think because we can call it. Well, let me think. The reason why actually the floor or that's like a bench, but however, to me it's a pieces of floor, right? Pieces of floor rather than a bench at a classical park. Functions much more informally, openly, and much more communal manner actually relates to modernism in a way. Modernism or like a bigger stretches or longer stretches of modernism, so that the chair culture or the culture of kind of European standard lifestyle that in a way kind of confined or formalized the interaction between individuals. I think in late 18th century France, when people suddenly come out and begin to paint plein air paintings and things like that, there's a recognition of coming out onto the nature, and I think it was a kind of exception for Europeans, be outside. But I think going back to the Asianness or not, I don't think it's exclusively Asianness, but culture that has the floor or that relates to the ground in a more kind of intimate manner, I think there is a very, very different relationship to these things, and I don't know what to call it, because I think you'll find it if you go to like Caribbean island, there will be a mat, they will be sitting on the floor, so it's not Asian thing. But it is something that is almost like alternative to classic modern or classic, you know what I mean?
But
yeah.
Well, Sorry, what?
Yeah, I just feel like I don't think we should fall into the trap of trying to name.
Exactly.
Or
yeah.
at least we can name the chair to
Yeah.
be more precise
give
of
more
what the
exam-
chair comes
correct.
from. And
Yeah.
the rest of this is well very diverse
Yes,
and
yes.
very
Yeah.
complex.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then of course in the Japanese or house, right? Like ever since the beginning of the kind of the so-called the modernization of Japan, there always exist two kinds of rooms.
Yeah.
And they just have to have those two rooms. Like one is on the floor and one is the proper chair and the table, and it's okay.
Well-
That's how we want to. That's just a different way of mediating change.
And-
Like I feel like So I think I think it's more important to bring up the specific phenomenon than just trying to name the phenomenon. Yeah.
And I think also in addition to sort of the relation of the body to the ground, whether that's through a chair or something else, there's also the sort of social component of different bodies relating to each other as we're sitting here. And in preparation of this session, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood that in Korea up until the late 19th century, there was within families people would eat separately from each other. Is that correct? Like the grandfather would sit.
That has more to do with patriarchy. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, but that's because that was going to be the next, because the sort of gender
Right.
roles in
Yeah,
like,
there
changed
was
as
gender role, but I think as far as I remember, there was no separation. I think there are families, but they will be still in the same on the same ground,
but sitting at
but
different
maybe
tables,
on the
right?
different table, the sitting sit table. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Well, I mean, I have a question about naming things, because when I was young, like modernism translated into something called 现代, right? 现, it means now. But it's also a classical thing that's been in the history. And when I saw the name on the thing, when we say plural modernism, are we talking about the now or the past, or how does progression and the bilingual and the power of naming things, like we just talked about? A complicated situation. When I was young, I was always confusing. Are we living now, or when we refer to 100 years old? It's like
It's different from 现在 though.
right.
现代.
Yeah, 现代.
Yeah,
When we
现代
say
is
it,
it's an age, it's a spirit.
Right.
Yeah, it's a.
It's also translated from Japanese, actually. So that's, also like, there's just so much of this kind of translation history that is part of that too. I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing as contemporary in architectural terms, because in contemporary art, I think we don't really talk about modern. Modern is a very particular period, but we talk about contemporary. But I don't know if there is a contemporary architecture.
But 当代, contemporary, there is, right? Because it's like ongoing now. But if you're talking about modern architecture versus modernist, that's a historical baggage,
Yeah.
right? But modern, it's a phenomenon.
Style.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
it's
we're
a
going-
style in the past, and it's been defined at least.
Oh no, the
now.
IST is the style.
Yes.
They tend to put an IST as the style. But modern architecture, it can be anything.
Anything.
It's a periodic thing, meaning that at the moment we are dealing with modernity in general, even until today, until tomorrow. It's a phenomenon of change. That's what I would call it, as broadly as a phenomenon of change, a transformation, and we are always going through it, right? So, but of course, if we want to complicate things with pre-modern, that's a whole
Or
other
post.
thing, right? So I'm just thinking within something that is viscerally clear, within a technological kind of like moment of time, yeah.
Do you have a clear, because I think it's interesting, like yesterday we had a, I think, great conversation about temporalities, and I think there's also many different temporalities. I think that's the pluralism, I guess, is partly temporal as well. You started pre-modern, you mentioned pre-modern. Is there, do you see the fluidity in time, or do you work with
Because
the heart?
I really think there is a pragmatic use of terms. There's a real
Agreed,
usefulness to some things, and different scenarios require different use of terms to do something about it. So I just give an example. So when I was interviewed for a job, of course this job, my boss, the director at the time of M+, Lars Nidva, asked me, so Shirley, when did modern design begin in Asia? Okay, not Asia, China. When did modern design begin? Oh my goodness. Okay, so if those who go to history school, right, in history class, of course you wouldn't say, I won't go as far as pre-modern, but in China at least, they would talk about The modern began when there is a huge shift in how things are rendered or depicted. It's the perspective. Yep. So then that happens in the Qing court. When the Italian priests came to the Qing court and rendered things differently. You depict things differently. So it's a different representative mode. So that's 1800s mid, right? Around there. It's not 1800s, around there, yeah. So I told him 1800s. And then he was like, no. And I'm like, why? What do you mean? Like, we can't build a museum collection from the 1800s, right? Because the use here has got to do with you building a collection of modern in that sense. Of course, generally, and I said, okay, fine. Maybe 1910, 1920. That's a big change, urban-wise, culture, especially in cities like Shanghai, right? The treaty ports, there's a major influx of the foreign, major infrastructure, lifestyle, objects. Then you can call
or
that
the
a change.
kind of going back to the infrastructure, which is the lighting. Actually, I did a bunch of research on early Shanghai streetlights. When does that come? And even early periodical Ko Liang You, which depict a woman underneath the streetlights, right? So the lighting, streetlights, infrastructure of lighting, is in many ways defined when modernity starts. But I don't know if that's modernism. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right? To see it as a broader phenomenon and then see how it manifests on different levels. But we must see the bigger picture, or else we're just picking out styles. We're not seeing the forces, like the infrastructure is a big one.
But where's the postmodern? I guess I'm just thinking the kind of overlapping kind of a parallel timelines, perhaps linear ones, let's say, between contemporary art and contemporary practices of architecture. Because I think there is a very particular moment where it shifts from modern to contemporary, but that doesn't really exist in the discourse of architecture.
Well, for post?
You mean postmodern?
Yeah, which is the 80s.
That's a very big,
very different.
So to me, the shift towards modern versus modern to postmodern is very different. To me, postmodern is a much more constructed. It's a reaction. It's almost like a to me, it's a rhetorical game actually. Yeah.
To an extent, yeah. And it's short-lived.
Short-lived. That's why.
In architectural history, but I think we can complicate that. I think if you talk to most people, they would reference, by postmodern architecture. I think still most people would understand historical postmodernism. With sort of going back to the Beaux-Arts. I think there was a big Beaux-Arts exhibition at MoMA, which was influential in the 70s, and that sort of started this historical referencing, but a very specific historical referencing. And I think in art, postmodernism is way more interesting in that sense, because the referencing happens on plural levels, and is still in a way, goes. So I mean, there's people that argue we haven't even been modern yet. I'm not sure if we're yeah.
But I still love that movement. I mean, the thing is, it purged many things. I use the word purged because we always use the example of Kengokuma. Okay, the example of Kengokuma. Okay, those who know Kengokuma, just Google M2 Gallery. Which is
I've seen the drawings in your collection, right?
Yeah. It's like a car storage, like a car gallery, to sell cars. And it's completely, he's a big fan of Michael Graves, like completely all these Roman kind of columns. Yeah. But then he got condemned after that project. And then people said he was so ashamed of that project, he went to the countryside and began a whole new idea of looking at materials, the vernacular and all that, right? So it's actually a good thing. These things, people go through these things. It's not a bad thing. And then they find your own path. But it was a good moment of, pushing your ideas and asking, who are you? So I think it was still a very amazing kind of cultural phenomenon, yeah.
Well, I got to know Kengokuma during that period. Like the first time I met him, he was doing that. And I was like, wow, this guy is quite strong, huh? Like this, postmodern thing. It was like, wow.
I think the postmodern has very interesting, almost like an absence in Korea in a way. I think in my mind, a little bit. Not postmodern as a true postmodern things, but postmodernism or stylistic rendition of it that we are familiar with in the kind of Western historical studies. That is absence, and I think that is fortunate in a way. That is fortunate in a way, but then it actually left kind of a strange void in the kind of almost like a reckoning of modernism, because I think in the Western context, not to generalize, but there was modernism and there was a postmodernism, and then, okay, that's not it, we must do something else. But I think the absence of postmodernistic style, which I think is due to the fact that the symbols and the signs of the Western postmodernism doesn't appeal to Koreans at all. Yeah, not relevant at all. I think that provided this void, which is in a way opportunity, but also kind of a strange limbo in a way.
No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
I wanted to
Johnny,
build
please.
on
Yeah.
those kind of lines of discussion already, like postmodern architecture. I think in the context of China, we have a lot of like an ornate replica of an Eiffel Tower, of those kind of like what we understand might seen as postmodern architecture in today's context. But it's all lexicons that we're borrowing from a field that had been there in the Western context for a long time. And I want to ask both of you who work here, and for Nahyun, who partially works in this part of the continent, and what is the lexicon that we're using now, teaching students and talking to the audience, you know, referring to these kind of styles like pastiche and postmodern and modernism, modernity, all of that? Like, what is the language that we use in terms of, discussion today with younger generation?
I don't know if we actually, in a way that it is kind of encouraging to see that we don't talk about it much. I don't know, Bart, let me know if that's not true at the school. But I think when I was a student, the heavy kind of emphasis on our understanding of kind of quote-unquote modernism and how the built environment should be done, or what was right, what was wrong, all this kind of historicization, and I guess like kind of going back to the generalization question of contrasting between different cultures, etc. In a way, I think these days the younger I don't know if it's the younger generations, in a way, new thinking, or is older generations fatigue. Maybe that doesn't become our kind of sui generis. That doesn't become the basis for our new work. I think that is actually what is happening and what should be happening. Yeah.
No, I'm glad you're saying that as a tutor, right? As a teacher, because but it does not at the same time, I feel, make anything less to question or to discuss these things. Because in these, I think I mentioned, there's still a lot of assumptions. So for example, in Hong Kong at least, it's within the historians kind of like field that we'll try to really nitpick these terms, but only for the reason of having to construct histories and a wider set of references of what's happening in Asia, and not just to take on references of phenomenon in Europe and America or Japan as our only example. So interestingly, HKU, for example, in Hong Kong is now beginning, so it used to be very Euro, America, and Japan. Or maybe China, that's it, right? But then now they're like going to Philippines, going to Thailand, going to South Asia, and I'm really glad. And that shift is a very kind of almost a subtle one, because it's not like the students are discussing modern or not, but it's coming from the tutors who are also aware that the canon isn't just one. And so I think this discussion is still needed. The faculty members themselves, the historians, are talking to the practitioners, and there's a greater understanding that we cannot just refer to one model of building or designing. So it does affect present practice. by looking, and they're even going to all the, the villages and all that. So they're not looking, so they're also studying the vernacular in a different way and having an appreciation for it. But in the past, they were only looking at cities. I'm not saying bad about cities at all, but they are really, I think it's much more versatile. The spectrum is wider. Yeah, so I think it helps. These discussions help to make people feel that don't be so biased about different sources of knowledge, right? So I think you're right. There are other urgencies like climate change and all that. I mean, that they need to deal with, right? But social equity. But I think now, to me, all these things about seemingly theoretical, historical stuff, I think goes back to equity. To me, social equity is not just about, okay, I give you equal amount of money, but also the rights to particular knowledge of space, like knowledge areas. That is also equity. So actually providing many references is a kind of equity too. So I think there's an awareness of that. Yeah. So I think
no, I was just saying, I don't know if this informed your question, but yesterday I was surprised because the notion of poche came up. Still poche and party. Anyway, that's
I was surprised too.
Yeah, you were surprised too, right? Anyway, sorry, that's a side note. Please, Ratchaporn. No, this
I'm just saying that like the idea of poche is in the ways is almost like kind of when you don't know what to do with the space, right? And it was referenced in a different way. That was I'm surprised, and it's interesting that the way like people kind of use the term that it has this vagueness attached to it and interpret it in totally different contexts. That's what I thought. You can go further.
Any other questions?
Maybe other people should talk. I mean, I think I talk too much.
Yes, I think there's, one here, please.
Hi, I have a question for Shirley, the curator of the M+ Museum. I went there once in 2023, and I noticed that was a lot of objects there was a combination of the historical feeling and the everyday life. Like the many objects you mentioned, like the mat and the everyday living objects. So I want to know for you how to balance that to deliver the both feeling to the.
You mean the historical versus the everyday, or
the
historical and the present?
Maybe the present and the everyday was similar in.
Yeah, I think as a museum, I would think, but I think even more for for someone like RAM, I think you have a greater task of dealing with the contemporary, right? And like an interest. I think for us, because we call ourselves a collecting museum of the 20th and the 21st century, so with that, naturally, the historical remit becomes important. So we do want to acquire objects, conserve them, and research them that maybe 50 years ago, 70 years ago, there was actually, we were trying to get hold of these archives. Some architects were about to die. So, because before they pass away, we want to get them, so it was a little bit of a historical kind of exercise, because we have to historicize things. That's part of our remit. But the museum doesn't end there. The museum also has to deal with what's happening now. But of course, we cannot be split too much into 4 parts and then do different things. But so now we are actually doing more work in really acquiring works that are representing what's happening. What are the issues? What are the debates? What are the challenges of present practice? Starting to do a bit more of that now that we have covered a little bit of the historical bit. So I think we need to be able to engage both. Ideally, not an easy one, but I think we want to engage both. Yeah.
Because I noticed your background. Maybe it's a historian background, and also I'm studying history. So for me personally, I just to have a strong sensibility of that way compared to the contemporary things. So for me, I think because when I visit M+, I feel much stronger feeling of the past more than in here, right? Because it's more, contemporary, everything here, because we're highlighting that to be more advanced, to be progressed. In M+, I feel, well, it's very hard to describe that feeling, but it's pretty new for me, but it's old.
Yeah, so I think I hope it's a positive one, because for us, we want to let people know, do you know that these things exist in the 50s? Don't think that only Europe and America can build hyperbolic paraboloid roofs for their airport, but Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia also did the same thing. You know, so that's kind of like, you're right. We are bringing back the past to show that these were all going on at the same time. None is necessarily more superior than the other. So there's a reason for it. It's not like about nostalgic, but showing what was really, what were the happenings all at the same period. And it's important for Asia to have this story, I feel, or else we will only be looking to one direction. So yeah, but
thank you very much.
But I also think, I don't know, this is a question for all curators who are looking at the contemporary. I'm sure you all also want to think about things contemporary historically, right? That's almost like a necessity. Or else, how do we create critical distance in how we approach a subject today? I think we need to be able to exercise that, even for subjects of now. Yeah.
I think the key word of tonight is plurality, basically. Not only modernities, modernisms, curating practices, everything. Like, I think that's the lesson of tonight. I want to thank everyone for being here. And tomorrow, 4 p.m., there will be the next potluck. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Can you talk a little bit about tomorrow, potluck, so that people would be...
Yes, yeah. So tomorrow's...
Even more diverse.
Yeah. Tomorrow's potluck will bring together 3 young curators who are active across Asia. Robin Hartanto, who you know, Sho Lim, and Jane Chongshwat. So Robin is based in Singapore, but from Indonesia originally. Sho from Malaysia, and Jane from Thailand. So together tomorrow they will discuss their most recent curatorial and research work. In a potluck, they will have exciting objects. And I think we'll sit here and will you join? Will you be here tomorrow? Or you're flying out tomorrow? Okay. So I hope to see many of you tomorrow again. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, bye. And thank you, Nahyun, and thank you for
so
Shirley
much
for coming here.